In a world where survival often means hiding the parts of ourselves we fear the most, Lily finds herself at rock bottom. But when Jack, a compassionate stranger, takes her in, he gives her more than just shelter. He offers her a chance to heal. Together, they begin an unexpected journey of self-discovery, with one thing becoming clear: healing isn't linear, and love doesn't always look how we expect it. As Lily confronts her past and begins to find herself again, she realizes that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come after the hardest struggles. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow their incredible story. The sky was gray that chilly autumn afternoon. The leaves drifted gently from the trees, as if the season itself was softly bidding farewell to summer. Jack, a young, successful businessman, hurried through the busy streets of downtown, his fast-paced steps reflecting the rush of his life. He was used to the luxury and hustle of his daily routine, but something about this particular afternoon felt different. There was an emptiness, an unshakable feeling of something missing that he couldn't quite define. As he passed a less crowded street, a face caught his attention. Sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against the wall of an old building, was a woman. She was dirty, with ragged clothes, and her eyes seemed lost, completely invisible to everyone around her. But Jack, amidst the crowd, paused for a moment and stared. She didn't ask for help, nor did she look at him with expectation. Her expression seemed to carry the weight of someone who had lost faith in humanity. He didn't know why, but something urged him to approach. As he walked closer, she looked up at him, her tired eyes, yet still with a flicker of life. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. The woman hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether it was worth answering. Then she spoke softly. Just a blanket would be nice." Jack wasn't prepared for what he would do next. A man who was used to dealing with business, money, and luxury had no idea how to deal with the raw, painful vulnerability of another human being in such a condition. But somehow, he knew he couldn't just turn away. "Come with me. I'll take you to my house," he said impulsively, but with the certainty that he couldn't leave her there. She looked at him skeptically, but the idea of shelter, of a place to rest, seemed almost like a distant dream for her. She didn't respond, just gave him a silent look that made him feel like his decision was the right one. Jack didn't expect her to follow him. There was an uncertainty in her gaze that made him wonder if he had made a mistake. But as he turned to walk away, he heard her faint footsteps behind him. "Wait," she whispered, and he stopped, turning back. She was standing, the weight of her body leaning against the building as if it took all her strength to push herself up. The look in her eyes was still wary, but something in her expression had shifted. Maybe it was the vulnerability he'd seen in her, or maybe she had simply run out of options, but she was walking toward him now. "Thank you," she said quietly, voice rough and cracked. She didn't know if it was pride or shame that stopped her from saying more, but she kept her gaze averted, as if afraid to look too long into his eyes. Jack nodded, not knowing what else to say. His world, so structured and planned, had been shaken by this simple, impulsive decision. The city felt different now, quieter somehow, as if the noise of his daily life had faded into the background. He found himself focusing more on the woman at his side than the path ahead. She was small, delicate even, with dark, tangled hair that framed her face like a messy halo. Her clothes, threadbare and torn, hung loosely on her frame. Yet, despite everything, there was something captivating about her. It wasn't just her appearance, but the quiet strength that lingered in the way she moved. It was as if she had seen too much, lived through too much, to be truly broken. The walk to his apartment was short but felt endless. The weight of his decision settled on his shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, Jack wondered what kind of man he was becoming. When they finally reached his building, he let her go first, holding the door open for her. As she stepped inside, she hesitated once more, her eyes scanning the clean, modern lobby before she looked back at him. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, a hint of fear in her voice. "I don't want to cause any trouble." Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "You're not causing any trouble. Just come in. We'll get you something to eat and you can rest. You're safe here." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since they'd met. But Jack knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She wasn't just going to forget the life she'd left behind, and he wasn't sure how long he could hold on to the small spark of trust she had given him. Still, he had made a choice, and now they would both have to navigate the unknown together. The apartment was far from what she had imagined. The walls were pristine, painted in soft tones that seemed almost too perfect, and the furniture was sleek, minimalist, with sharp edges. It felt like the kind of place a successful businessman would live in, someone who had everything in control. And here she was, standing in this immaculate space, feeling as out of place as a shadow in the daylight. Jack led her to the living room and gestured for her to sit on the couch. She hesitated, unsure of where to put herself. Should she sit on the edge, as if ready to leave at any moment? Or should she sink into the softness, allow herself a moment of comfort? She hadn't felt comfort in so long that she barely knew how to accept it. "Can I get you something?" Jack asked, his voice soft but insistent. She stared at him for a moment, trying to gauge whether he was sincere. He didn't seem like the type to help out of obligation. She had known enough people in her life to recognize the difference between charity and kindness. Jack's kindness felt real. "A glass of water would be fine," she replied, her voice still hoarse from the cold air. He nodded and walked into the kitchen, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sank into the couch, but it didn't offer the warmth she expected. The room felt sterile, too bright, as if it was waiting for something she didn't know how to give. The sounds of the city outside felt distant, muffled, like she was in a bubble, safe, but isolated. Her fingers traced the fabric of the couch nervously, the luxury of the surroundings making her feel small, unworthy. She hadn't lived like this in years. Before the streets, before everything fell apart, she had a life, a family, a home. But now, she was nothing more than a stranger in his world. Jack returned with a glass of water and set it down in front of her, his eyes lingering on her face. There was a tension between them now, something unspoken but felt by both. He didn't know what to do with her, how to bridge the gap between their worlds. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking down at the glass. She didn't touch it right away, unsure of how to accept anything from him, even something as simple as water. "I'm just trying to help," he said, sitting across from her in the armchair. His posture was rigid, as if he too were still adjusting to the situation. He had opened his door, but now the weight of the decision was sinking in. "You can stay as long as you need. You don't have to worry." But she did worry. How could she not? She had nothing to offer him in return. No money, no services, no promises. All she had were broken pieces of herself, things she wasn't sure anyone could put together again. She finally picked up the glass and drank slowly, the cool water soothing her dry throat. As she lowered the glass, her gaze met Jack's once more, and for the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. Concern, yes, but also curiosity. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? "You don't have to talk yet," Jack said, his voice gentle. "Take your time." She nodded, grateful for his patience. The silence stretched between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had crossed paths in the most unlikely of ways, unsure of what would come next, but aware that something had already changed. Days passed in a blur of quiet moments, with Jack and the woman, whom he still hadn't asked her name, becoming increasingly familiar with each other in silence. They shared meals together, though she often ate in small bites, as if savoring the luxury of having food without fear of where the next meal would come from. Jack found it hard to speak at first, unsure of how to approach someone so broken by life. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her words came with a rawness that made him want to protect her from the world. Her name was Lily. He had learned it after a few days, when she had finally spoken it aloud, almost like a whisper. It felt like a small victory for Jack, a simple but important step toward bridging the distance between them. That afternoon, as the sun streamed through the wide windows of his apartment, Jack noticed Lily sitting by the window, staring out at the skyline. She seemed lost in thought, her hands folded on her lap, her posture tense as if she were waiting for something. Maybe she was waiting for him to speak. Maybe she was just waiting for life to go back to normal, whatever that meant. He couldn't ignore the fact that he was still unsure of how much he should push her. She hadn't talked about her past, and Jack hadn't asked. But as the days wore on, he found himself wondering what kind of life she had before she ended up on the streets. It wasn't just about helping her anymore. He was starting to feel something for her, a pull that was both confusing and undeniable. That evening, after a quiet dinner of soup and bread, Jack decided to break the silence. "Lily," he started gently, his voice filled with an unexpected tenderness. "If you want to talk about where you came from or what happened, I'm here. You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but I'd like to understand." She didn't look at him immediately. Instead, her gaze drifted back out the window, her fingers nervously playing with the fabric of her worn sweater. Jack held his breath, waiting, unsure of whether she would even acknowledge his words. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but edged with pain. "I didn't choose this life, Jack. I didn't choose to be invisible." Her words hung in the air between them, each one carrying the weight of years of hardship, of survival. Jack felt a tightness in his chest as he listened, knowing that this was only the beginning. But he didn't push her further. Instead, he gave her the space to speak, letting her open up at her own pace. "I used to have a family," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I wasn't always like this. I had a life, a future, I thought. But things happen, and you learn, quickly, that no one cares, that no one will help you when you need it." Jack moved from across the room to sit beside her, his presence quiet and steady. "You're not invisible here, Lily. I see you, and I want to help, but you don't have to share anything you're not ready to." Lily's eyes finally met his. There was vulnerability in them, but there was something else too, something deeper, like a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. She gave him a soft, uncertain smile. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt like a breakthrough, though small. Jack knew it would take time to unravel the layers of her past, but he was in no hurry. For now, he was content to let her find her way out of the shadows, at her own pace, with him beside her. And for the first time, he realized that he wasn't just offering her shelter. He was offering her a chance to heal. The days turned into weeks, and a strange rhythm settled into their lives. Jack found himself spending more time at home than usual, not just to ensure that Lily was comfortable, but because he felt something drawing him to her, something he couldn't quite explain. Lily, for her part, had begun to show subtle signs of change. She no longer sat in silence for hours, staring out the window. She spoke more, though still in quiet tones, and even helped around the apartment, taking on small tasks like washing the dishes or folding the laundry. At first, Jack had insisted on doing everything for her, but she insisted, her need to feel useful stronger than her hesitation. One morning, as Jack made his way into the living room with a cup of coffee, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her. The light from the early morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating her face in a way that made her look almost serene. The sight stopped Jack in his tracks. "Hey, you're up early," Jack said, trying to sound casual, but there was a tenderness in his voice he hadn't meant to let slip. Lily looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "I couldn't sleep. I was thinking." Jack set the coffee down on the counter and walked over to her. "About what?" She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. I used to write," she said quietly, the words almost like a confession. "Before everything changed, I wrote poetry, stories. It helped me make sense of things." Jack sat down across from her, his curiosity piqued. "What happened to it?" Lily's gaze dropped to the table and she sighed. "I don't know. I guess I stopped believing in it. It felt like something I had to let go of to survive. Writing was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore." The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken emotions. Jack's heart ached for her. To lose something so personal, something that had once been a lifeline, was a loss he could only begin to comprehend. "Maybe it's not too late," Jack said softly, his voice sincere. "You don't have to give it up. If it helped you before, maybe it can help you now." Lily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. She said nothing for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, she nodded, though the uncertainty remained. "Maybe," she whispered. Jack smiled, though it was small. "I'll leave you to it then," he said, standing up. "But if you ever want to share anything, I'm here." As he left her to her thoughts, he couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. Maybe it wasn't just the space she needed to heal, but the freedom to reclaim parts of herself she had lost. The freedom to choose how she wanted to move forward. Later that afternoon, Jack returned home to find Lily sitting at the table again, her notebook open in front of her, pen in hand. The sight filled him with quiet hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was beginning to find her voice again, piece by piece. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to their lives, small victories, small setbacks. Lily began writing again, but it wasn't easy. She would often start a page, only to leave it unfinished, the words not flowing as easily as they once had. It was as if the act of putting her thoughts down on paper was both a relief and a reminder of everything she had lost. Jack, for his part, kept his distance, respecting her need for space while also offering support when it was needed. There were moments when he would find her reading one of her old notebooks, a far-off look in her eyes. And sometimes, late at night, she would wake up from a restless sleep, the nightmares creeping into her dreams, the horrors of the past still chasing her. It wasn't the physical scars that haunted Lily, but the emotional ones, the abandonment, the betrayal, the loss. All of it was buried deep inside her, and no matter how much she tried to bury it further, it kept resurfacing. One evening, after dinner, Jack found her staring out the window again, the same vacant look on her face. It had become a familiar sight to him, a sign that she was lost in herself, caught in the grip of something dark and painful. He walked over to her slowly, standing beside her without speaking. There was something in the air between them, something unspoken, but Jack knew that now wasn't the time to push. He had seen enough to understand that Lily wasn't ready to confront everything at once. Healing wasn't linear. "Lily," he said softly, breaking the silence. She turned her head toward him, her eyes empty, but still there. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack furrowed his brow. "Sorry for what?" "For being broken," she said, looking away again. "For being such a mess." He felt his chest tighten. There was no guilt in her tone, no expectation that he should fix her. But the words still hit him, cutting deeper than he cared to admit. "You're not a mess," he said firmly, kneeling down to her level. "You're human, and that's okay. We all have our scars, our pasts, our brokenness." Lily shook her head, her voice quivering. "You don't understand. I didn't just lose things, Jack. I lost myself. I don't even know who I am anymore." Jack reached out and took her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. He gently squeezed it, offering the only thing he could, the comfort of presence. "You'll find yourself again," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "It might take time, and it might not look the way you thought it would, but you're not alone in this. I'm here with you." Lily didn't respond right away, but she didn't pull away either. Her head rested on his shoulder as the two of them stood there in the quiet of the apartment, the outside world fading into the distance. For a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped, like there was no past or future, just the two of them, silent but connected. In that silence, Jack realized something that he hadn't fully understood until now. He wasn't just caring for her, trying to fix her or save her. He was walking alongside her, just as lost in his own way, just as unsure of what the future held. But they had each other, and that, for now, was enough. The days following their quiet moment of connection were filled with a tentative peace. Lily began writing more frequently, though it wasn't always coherent, and it wasn't always happy. Her notebook became a battleground of sorts, where she wrestled with her emotions, her memories, and the possibility of a future she hadn't dared to dream about in years. But there were also days when she felt lighter. Days when Jack's quiet support seemed to ease the tightness in her chest, when she didn't feel quite so lost. They had started to share more moments together, small things, like laughing over a joke during dinner, or sitting side by side on the couch as Jack worked from home, her presence no longer a shadow in his apartment but a part of the rhythm of his life. One evening, after a particularly quiet day, Lily sat down at the kitchen table, her notebook open in front of her. She was staring at the blank page, her pen hovering above it, as if the words were right there, but she couldn't find the courage to write them down. Jack had spent the afternoon at a meeting, and Lily had stayed behind, going through the motions of the day, trying to fill the time with something meaningful. But now, as the evening settled in, she realized how much had changed in the few weeks she had spent in Jack's home. How much she had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had first stepped through that door, cold, angry, and empty. She wasn't whole, not yet, but she wasn't lost anymore either. And then, as if reading her thoughts, Jack walked into the room. He paused when he saw her, his eyes scanning the open notebook in front of her. "You writing again?" he asked gently, his voice light, but there was a quiet understanding in his words. Lily looked up at him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to smile. "Yeah," she said, her voice a little steadier than usual. "I think I'm starting to remember how." Jack's face softened, and he crossed the room to stand beside her. Without a word, he gently placed his hand over hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her, offering her something she hadn't known she needed. "You've come so far," Jack said quietly, the words filled with sincerity. "And it's okay if you don't have all the answers yet. It's okay if the future feels blurry. We'll figure it out together." Lily's eyes stung, and she turned her face away quickly, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill over. She didn't want to cry. Not again. But something about Jack's presence, his calm certainty, made the walls she had built around herself start to crack. She had never felt so seen, so understood. And for the first time in years, she felt like she didn't have to hide the parts of herself she was ashamed of. She could be broken and still be worthy of kindness, still worthy of love. "I don't know how to say this," she began, her voice trembling. "But Before she could finish, Jack kneeled down in front of her, looking up into her eyes. His hand still rested gently over hers. "You don't have to say anything, Lily," he said, his voice steady. "Not right now. I just want you to know that whatever you're feeling, it's okay. You don't have to have all the answers today or tomorrow. We're in this together." Lily's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time since she had come into his life, she allowed herself to truly believe him. He was right. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't have to be whole yet. All she needed was this moment, this connection. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think about a future. One that might not be perfect, but one where she didn't have to walk alone anymore. The days that followed were filled with a quiet intensity. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but there was a certain calm between them now. A knowing silence that spoke volumes. Jack was no longer just a stranger who had opened his door to her. He had become something more, someone she trusted, someone who was no longer a temporary part of her life, but an anchor. Lily's writing had transformed too. The words were no longer fragmented. She found herself writing with more purpose, letting the stories flow onto the page as she uncovered parts of herself she thought were long gone. The notebook, which had once seemed like an impossible barrier to her healing, was now a map of her journey, a record of her slow, steady return to herself. One evening, as they sat in the living room together, Jack looked over at her, noticing the subtle change in her. She was no longer the broken woman who had wandered into his life, unsure of her worth. She had found something. Maybe not all the answers, but she had found herself again. "You've been quiet today," Jack remarked, his voice light, though he felt a pang of worry. Lily glanced up from her notebook, meeting his gaze. There was a warmth in her eyes now, a softness that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty still lingering. about what comes next. Jack leaned back in his chair, waiting for her to continue. He hadn't pushed her for answers, not once in all this time, because he knew that healing was a journey with no set timeline. "What do you want next, Lily?" Jack asked softly, his tone encouraging but patient. Lily paused, searching for the right words. "I think I want to start over. I want to be me. Not just the version of myself I was before everything happened, but a new version. I want to create something that's just for me." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "And what does that look like?" She stood up, walking toward the window that overlooked the city skyline. It was a familiar view, one that had once felt distant and unreachable. Now it felt like a symbol of the possibilities that lay ahead. "I don't know exactly," she said, turning back to face him. "But I know it doesn't involve living in fear. It doesn't involve letting the past define me. I've spent too long hiding from who I am. It's time to move forward." Jack stood and walked toward her, standing beside her at the window. For a long moment, they both looked out, the city lights twinkling in the distance, and for the first time, it felt like they were seeing the future, together. "I'm proud of you," Jack said quietly, his voice full of genuine admiration. Lily smiled softly, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you, without this space you've given me." "You gave yourself that space," Jack replied, his gaze warm. "You took the first step. I'm just glad I could be here for the journey." The silence between them was different now. It wasn't heavy or filled with uncertainty. It was a comfortable quiet, one filled with the understanding that they had both changed, that they had both grown. And as they stood there, side by side, Lily felt something inside her she hadn't felt in years, a sense of hope. It wasn't the hope of a perfect future, but the hope of something real, something she could hold on to. Jack was right. She didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as she had thought. For the first time in a long time, Lily was ready to embrace whatever came next. Because no matter what, she wasn't alone.